You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Amanda Hamilton. Amanda is the past CEO and current patron of the National Association of Licensed Paralegals. And the title of this podcast is not necessarily 4 of the most glamorous paralegal jobs, but we're going to talk about the glamour that is being a paralegal in the legal sector. Thank you so much for joining the podcast, Amanda.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking.
We're going to start with an introduction to yourself. You're going to tell us a little bit about your role, how perhaps you've got involved in the paralegal community. And then, as I say, we're going to talk about the role of paralegals in the legal community because they have such an important part to play. We'll get on to that. Tell us first about yourself, please, Amanda.
Yes, David. Well, I started off running some paralegal training programs way back in the mid-90s. And through those training programs, I met the then CEO of NALP, National Association of Paralegals. And we became quite friendly and started discussing a lot about paralegal role. And in the mid-late 90s, it wasn't great. The role of the paralegal, I think the term had just literally found its way into the legal profession over from the States. And then slowly and gradually, we built up a relationship. And in 2007, when he decided to retire, he offered me the opportunity to take over the organization, which I did do. And for the last 14 years, I've promoted and been working alongside my team to build the organization and in particular to bring the role of paralegals into the fore, which I hope we've done to some extent. So I've seen the development of NALP from a very small localized business and professional membership body to a national and international professional membership body. We've also, in the last 12 years, added off-qual national paralegal qualifications that we are now delivering through various centres nationally and 1 or 2 international as well. Recently, in the last month and a half, beginning of October, I stepped down from the role of CEO, and I'm now been granted the role of patron, which basically means that I am still promoting the organisation in the ways that I can.
All of the jobs with none of the pay.
You might say that.
It's really interesting to hear that the paralegal was a term from the United States then.
Yes. Paralegals have been working with attorneys in the United States since the 1960s. But the term wasn't really a term used at all over here until the late 1980s, when my predecessor created the Paralegal Association. And really, I think over the years, the definition of what a paralegal is has changed. Traditionally in this country, I think a lot of solicitors regard paralegals as law graduates and would-be solicitors. In other words, they want paralegal roles in order to gain experience, but eventually their ambition is to become a solicitor. Over the last 10 years or so, that's changed drastically, and perhaps in our conversation it will emerge why that is.
Well, go on then. Don't leave me on tenterhooks.
Yeah.
Is it that paralegal is now a profession in itself. So as you say, rather than being a stepping stone, it is now acceptable, it is now professionally achievable to become a paralegal.
Well, that's one of our objectives at NALP, was to promote the paralegal industry or sector as a profession in its own right. And, a lot of people in the conventional roles in the legal sector may say, well, that's ridiculous. How can they? Well, the role has changed ever since the rules on legal aid have changed. So in 2013, when legal aid was virtually eradicated for the consumer in general type of court cases, our belief is that the consumer has found it very, very difficult to be able to afford the fees of solicitors and barristers. And this is where paralegals can step in, because one of the things I mentioned is that we are a professional membership body, and half our members work in the legal sector and the other half don't. And a percentage of those other half work for themselves in their own paralegal practice. They have a license to practice from NALP. And there's nothing to say, there's no statutory bar to them working or giving advice and assistance to consumers. But what we say is that you need qualifications, you need experience, you need to get a license to practice, you need to get professional indemnity insurance to be able to offer a consumer access to justice at a reasonable cost. And as we know, solicitors do charge quite a lot, anywhere from perhaps £250, £300 an hour upwards to maybe £500 or £600 an hour for a most senior partner. And that certainly is not within the realms financially of most consumers. Whereas, of course, a paralegal may offer a fixed rate or an hourly rate that is cost effective, anywhere from £30 to £80 an hour for the work that they may do, depending on what that work is. Provided the paralegal practitioner, as we'd like to call them, does not offer or step over that boundary into reserved legal activities, then they can offer a very good service for consumers.
That regulated, unregulated debate rages, particularly in the wills and probate community, where you have this will writing community as opposed to the regulated private client community, perhaps.
Yeah.
Is it the objective of NALP to encourage greater regulation of this industry, or is it your role to work within the confines of the existing legislation?
It's our role, really, to work, as you suggest, within the confines of the current regulated system. And what we are out to achieve is to offer those unregulated service providers some sort of voluntary regulation by joining our organisation as a member. Now, if all of those will writers, and we do have many, many on our books as members, if they were all to join our organisation as a member, we have the right to regulate them. We have a code of practice in the same way as solicitors do, and we can accept complaints from members of the public in the way that solicitors' firms can if an associate solicitor or a solicitor working who's a staff member of that firm offering services, a client can then make a complaint to that law firm, and we can sanction those members. Obviously, we haven't got as great a sanction as the SRA might in such circumstances, but we can certainly withdraw any license to practice. We can certainly bar them from being a member. So there are certain sanctions we can do. As to regulation, I think personally, being in the sector for such a long time, I'm very much aware that the powers that be do not want further regulation. I think there's a consensus that there's far too much regulation already in the legal profession. And that's fine by us. I think that if we encourage those in the unregulated sector who are offering services to voluntarily join our organisation, we can have control over the way they offer services to the consumer. But the one drawback about not being regulated, of course, is that there is no statutory regulation for paralegals. And that basically means that anybody can refer to themselves as a paralegal. But our other objective, of course, is to educate consumers to ask questions of their service providers, especially if they refer to themselves as paralegals, check to see whether they are part of a membership organisation, check to see what their qualifications are, etc. So that's another of our objectives, to ensure consumers have that information out there, which many are unaware of. So we've still got a long way to go.
I guess thinking about this regulation debate challenge, training really comes to the fore, doesn't it? Because the solicitor will sit there and say, we've done 3 years at law school, we've done our training contract, we've done our law conversion degree, whatever their route into the profession is. How does NALP, how do paralegals ensure that they are sufficiently well trained to be able to give this advice?
Well, we have obviously we have to do our due diligence on anyone who wants to join at a certain category of membership, as well as doing a great deal of research and due diligence on them if they want a license to practice. And what we say is you've got to have a minimum of 3 years relevant legal experience, and that should be evidenced. Now, evidence can be a reference from an employer indicating when they joined, the work they were doing, etc., etc. Or if they were already offering help and assistance to consumers, a letter, a reference from somebody that they have assisted during a court case or whatever the situation was. So relevant legal experience is very explicit as far as we're concerned. It has to be 70% doing X, Y, Z, not just administration, not just secretarial work, etc., etc. So we have a definition of that. But I think it's also interesting that there is the definition of what a paralegal is fluctuates within the legal profession. And I mentioned earlier that solicitors tend to regard paralegals as nothing more than law graduates who want to be solicitors who are gaining experience. And many law firms and solicitors will not accept a role of a paralegal unless they've got a law degree, a legal practice course, or equivalent. And of course, we do offer the qualification side, as you mentioned, is very important. When somebody studies law, the law is the law. Whether they've got a law degree or they've got a NALP level 4 qualification, they've studied law. And I would like to see a slightly more diversity in the way that law firms interview the people they interview, so that people coming through the unconventional route of having taken, well, as far as solicitors are concerned, of having taken a NALP qualification, are just as are given just as much chance to be interviewed for a paralegal role as somebody who's got a law degree. Qualifications, of course, are very, very important, and that's one of the reasons why we developed these paralegal qualifications specifically bespoke for paralegals.
I've mentioned the fact there's an opportunity, for example, in will writing to be a paralegal. I know of IP paralegals. I know of paralegals in family. Is there a particular sector of the law where paralegals can really excel?
Well, I think any sector of the law, they can excel. Part of what we do is to offer our members an opportunity to be on the National Paralegal Register, which is available via our website. And if you go onto the different specializations on there, you'll see a huge number of specialist legal areas where our paralegals are excelling. And yes, I think in the legal profession itself, if paralegals are working for solicitors, there is a tendency to have them concentrated in wills and probate, in conveyancing, in family law matters, in civil litigation. But there is a hugely broad spectrum of different areas of law where paralegals can excel.
Let me turn the question round. Is there an area that you see that they're underutilized?
I think the answer to that is a difficult one, because if we're just talking about the legal profession, I think part of what we do is to try and educate law firms and solicitors individually and as a group to utilize the services of paralegals in any part of their business that they're struggling in. We have, I mentioned earlier that we have many members who work outside of the legal sector, in public and private sector industries, in-house in large organizations. We have members working at Premier League football clubs. The broad spectrum of avenues that they can go down is many. It is diverse. And I think as long as solicitors recognize that because of economics, financial restraints that are now gripping us all, that perhaps they should consider employing more paralegals in areas that perhaps they had not thought about previously.
I think one of the things that's come out of the conversation for me, Amanda, is that on one level, traditionally, you might say, the paralegal has been this stepping stone to become an associate, become a solicitor, whatever. But actually, what you're saying is that there is an opportunity for the paralegal to become a paralegal in their own right. They can set up their own business should they wish. They can go and work in-house as a paralegal. It sounds to me as though that's something that NALP is really encouraging.
Yeah, that's right. And encouraging for several reasons, because working as a paralegal professional is just as gratifying as working as a solicitor without the extra steps you need to take. That it also helps the consumer. We're very much focused on the consumer, from the consumer's point of view. Where do they go for legal assistance? And another, perhaps something else to explore, is the fact that there's been a mountain of pro bono units set up over the last 9 years since legal aid went out the window. But the focus on offering pro bono work is not sustainable for the profession, because, you know, what professional solicitor, barrister can offer 50% of their services for free, or 25% of it, or even 10% of their services for free? So our focus is very much from that side as well.
I'm minded to think of my own personal circumstances where I have a family member who's a dental hygiene therapist in a practice in Yorkshire, and she can do 70-80% of what a dentist can do for a third of the price, for the sake of argument, for half the price. What, you know, as you say, whatever a dentist might charge themselves out, what a solicitor might charge themselves out at. But the firm can continue to charge a reasonable fee for that. Okay, not a solicitor's fee, but a fair fee for it. And that to me feels like a win-win, because it leaves the firm doing the really complicated and very lucrative stuff, and it leaves the paralegal doing the work, but actually, doesn't necessarily need the input of a more senior associate solicitor or partner.
That is absolutely spot on.
If we look into our crystal ball and we start to think about how the role of the paralegal has changed since the 80s and 90s, and even, as you say, in the last 9 years since legal aid, what do you see the role of the paralegal being in the future? I suppose there's this, what you'd like to see and what the reality is probably going to be.
I think more of what we've been talking about. Essentially, I see that because of finances, that consumers will have no option but to use the services of a paralegal. And also businesses. We also encourage businesses to instruct paralegals rather than solicitors for those things, for those matters, legal matters that can be dealt with by paralegals at half or a third of the cost. So I see more of that, more high street paralegals offering services. I hope to have more education given to consumers and businesses about the use of legal personnel, who to go to for what. And of course, there are websites out there, Legal Choices being one of them, which explain the nature of the legal professionals we have in this country, which, by the way, is very complicated to somebody coming into this country without knowledge of it, as we seem to be the only country in the world that has sort of 5 different types of legal personnel or so. But I would like to see more information given to consumers, more consumers wanting, through choice, to go to a paralegal because it suits them and cost-wise is more cost-effective. I would like to see more businesses employing staff who are in-house paralegals to help with the legalities they have to deal with. So yes, I see a bright future. And of course, as long as the paralegal knows only too well the boundaries that they have to work within, that is to say they cannot offer reserved activities, there is absolutely no reason why they cannot go out there and everybody has a win-win situation. And as you mentioned earlier, a lawyer, a solicitor in a law firm can concentrate on doing the high-end kind of work, and employing a paralegal to do what a solicitor and or a paralegal can do would be extremely cost-effective and benefit their business.
Dare I say, I think there's an education piece for firms here as well, isn't there, to accept paralegals for what they are, for who they are, for what they can bring to the firm, without necessarily needing to plot a path for them becoming a solicitor, associate solicitor and partner.
Absolutely right. I mean, there are no doubt some law graduates who want to be solicitors. Okay, that's fine. But there are also a lot of law graduates who want to stop where they are and just do a few areas of law very well as a paralegal. And as long as the lawyer recognizes that and also accepts that there are paralegals coming from different avenues, I think that's where the education, we'd like to educate law firms around, that they don't necessarily, paralegals do not necessarily need a law degree to be a paralegal.
It's probably something that we could both talk about for most of the rest of the day, because I think I'm sensing a real passion from you about the value of a paralegal, what a paralegal can do, and actually accepting paralegals for who and what they are. But we're fast running out of time, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been really interesting to have your insight, given the experience you've got in the sector, and hear a little bit more about what NALP are up to.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and it's been a pleasure, David. Thank you so much.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Amanda. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.